morning. How's everybody doing? We're going to start in just a minute here. If everyone could find a seat. All right, so good morning. I first want to extend a big thank you to Kelly Schultz and the team at the Maryland Tech Council for bringing us all here today and getting us connected. So thank you. Lots going on, lots to be excited about here in Annapolis. And today our panel is going to be informative, and we're going to touch on an issue that can bring everyone together. That's access to connectivity. Addressing the digital divide and promoting equitable growth for Maryland. We're going to talk about how both wired and wireless have a role to play in addressing these goals and how we can make meaningful efforts to expand broadband access, which is as essential as reliable electricity and clean water, and how we can maximize investments in new networks, and how improvements in connectivity will support all kinds of new innovation from transportation to healthcare to public safety and education. I'm Laura Toraldo. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland 5G Partnership. We launched MD5G in the summer of 2020, and we are over 30 organizations statewide across industry sectors who have come together to support advancing connectivity throughout the state. And we do that through advocacy and education. And I'll turn our attention here to welcome our expert, and I'm realizing all-female panel from both the private and public sector. We're excited to have all of you here today. And if you could just take a moment and give your name, your organization, and how you're connected to this conversation on digital equity.
Okay, good morning. My name is Jinhee Kim. I'm Associate Dean and Associate Director for University of Maryland Extension at University of Maryland College Park. We are a non-formal education provider for the state, part of the land-grant mission. We're in around 31 locations around the state, each county and Baltimore City. My role for this panel is about the funding we received from the state of Maryland, part of the broadband advancement of the state of Maryland investment into digital literacy and digital navigation. University of Maryland Extension received funding to provide the leadership in digital literacy and the digital navigation. And we just received funding last May, and we are currently working on that part. So I would like to share about some updates as well as some of the findings we have done in the digital divide.
Thanks so much, Laura. It's great to be here. My name is Ashley Greenspan. I'm a public affairs manager at Crown Castle. Crown Castle has a number of assets, towers, fiber, and small cells that all work together to provide wireless access. And then we also have a robust enterprise business as well. So you may not realize it, but whenever you're using your cell phone, you might actually be relying on our network because it actually covers 70% of the state's population. And we work with a lot of the folks on this panel to help ensure that everyone's cell phones work. And it's great to be here with all of you here today.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie McEvoy. I'm a regional director for AT&T covering Maryland, Delaware, and DC. And we're here today, obviously, to talk about the digital divide and equity. At AT&T, we've been doing numerous things to help address that digital divide and homework gap over the years. And nationwide, we've committed about $2 billion to help address that through various different ways.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Harvey, and I am Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Comcast, and I handle their matters in Maryland and in Delaware. And I want to take a second and note not just that this is a women's panel, a panel set by women, but also the diversity represented on this stage and how important that is in this conversation, and just tech in general to have our voices here and reflected. And we're all kind of bosses in our own right? So Comcast, part of the story is we're an ISP, so we're an internet service provider, and we have been focused on addressing the digital divide for quite some time. It wasn't something that came to us in 2020. We've been at this game for over a decade. And so our part of the story is helping build infrastructure, but also making sure we address adoption issues across our footprint. And so that is part of the conversation that we'll be having today and the importance of that. So thank you for having us, and thank you so much for the Tech Council.
Hello, I am Kenya Osley. I am Interim Director of the Baltimore City Office of Broadband Digital Equity. I am here mostly because she told me to be here. And for Baltimore City, I don't have to quote the stats. We know that there is a serious issue of the digital divide in Baltimore City. So I am anxious to get into this panel as I'm working with everybody in some way on this panel. This is going to be very interesting. Thank you.
So a lot of expertise here on the stage today and a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right into our discussion. And when we say the digital divide, I think it's important that we understand where Maryland is. And Dr. Kim, some of the research that you've utilized illustrates how a lack in digital connectivity disproportionately impacts residents in Baltimore City, rural counties, those with lower income, older residents, and communities of color. Can you speak a little more about where we are and what we're talking about when we talk about Maryland's digital divide?
Thank you for the question. I think we have experts on this panel as well as in the room and then online that I don't want to reiterate about the accessibility or the reliable access to the internet services as well as devices, and also affordability to utilize them. But I would focus on some of the findings we have done with the digital literacy and skills, as well as some of the access to the services, how we connect them. So overall, as you mentioned about the geographic disparities between especially low-income rural communities as well as Baltimore City. But also there are huge discrepancies finding about some of the age with the older people, older adults, and the younger, older adults. But also more and more finding we are doing in this work is the income and also education play a larger roles than some of the other aspects of the race, ethnicity, or some of the geographic issues in terms of the digital literacy and then utilization of the internet or the technology. So those are some of the issues we find. For specifically in Maryland, there was a large sample, national samples about the digital literacy, and then sometimes we call it digital capital. It's not just the skills, it's also resourcefulness, and then also some of the access to understanding and access to the network of support for the digital internet or device and any other needs. So for the national samples, those are some of the findings we found about the education and income play a larger roles. And also for the mobile-only group may not fully take advantages of the technology to the fullest potential. But a lot of people rely on those mobile because they may not have reliable or affordable internet services. The other aspect I want to mention also is about the perceived benefits or the perceived usefulness of the internet or the technology. And that is a bigger issue we're seeing as the increasing digital literacy skills. Digital skills is important, but at the same time, people may not see the benefits of those technology as well as the resources available in their communities and things. The other part I also wanted to mention is the in our Maryland, also people with the limited English skills or the immigrants, and that is a large language barrier, are also big issues because a lot of information are not available in different languages and in a way they can understand or comprehend. The other part is also for the a lot of barriers, increasing the adoptions and skills. A lot of information are only available in digital mode. And many times we're dealing with the digital skills, but then they don't have access to the internet to learn about those digital skills, which are available mostly online or the digital world. And also other barriers that we learn is about, as it's nothing new, but barriers to the transportations, barriers to the locations, barriers to the stigma or anything, other barriers to the accessing the services are also inhibiting the advancement of the digital skills.
Great, thank you so much. And you mentioned, a group of people, especially underserved communities, who rely on mobile, and we know how important that wireless connectivity can be. A Pew Research study showed that low-income and minority families are more likely to rely on those wireless devices for their connection. And so they're using their cell phone to apply for jobs, to access health care, for not uncommon these days to do their homework. I want to open it up to the panel and to talk about how improvements in connectivity can help to close that digital divide.
I think one of the opportunities that we're really excited about is 5G. We're anticipating that 5G will be up to 100 times faster than the 4G standard. And so I don't think that anyone would say that wireless access should be a replacement for wired access. But what it really does mean is that families who are wireless only will have the equipment that they need in order to really participate in the digital divide. And so that's one of the things that we're invested in, is making sure that the wireless experience is as comparable to a wired experience as possible.
I think this is an opportunity to mention something kind of special that Maryland is doing and that other states are looking to do. And, there's been kind of an infusion of money coming from the federal government, and part of the way I think Maryland is trying to address the digital divide is we have the MEBB, right, which is the additional $15 subsidy that Maryland is allowing qualifying residents to use, and they can use it towards wired or wireless devices, right? And the importance of that goes to the larger conversation around relevance and how different folks in different communities use access to the internet, right? And the importance of that story is one that we want to make sure that we're telling. And at Comcast, we're definitely telling it as a carrier. We participate with MEBB, right? And it allows people, however they can and need to get online, to take advantage of that subsidy, as well as the ACP subsidy, which is a $30 subsidy. So in Maryland, our folks are getting $45. And so we need to do a better job, the collective we, right? The collective we, telling folks the story that you can have and you can be a part of this story, and you should be online, and there's a way to get you online. And there's also a device subsidy. And so we just have to do a better job telling that story, because the more we tell that story, the more pressure we're putting on the federal government to ensure that that money stays available as a form of a subsidy. And we need to pivot it to a permanent subsidy, so that as we're telling people that, hey, you need to be online and you need to have either wireless or wired connectivity, we're not going to then lose this subsidy. We're going to create an opportunity for a permanent subsidy to be in place that people can rely on, right? And so that's something that's important to us at Comcast, and making sure that we're telling that story so that people can actually get online.
There is a role for both wireless and wired connectivity, right? But if you really want to impact the homework gap, you have to have reliable, affordable, wired connectivity in the home, right? So we are not seeing our students sitting in the park on their devices doing their homework. No, we're seeing folks in their apartment, in their homes, with one Wi-Fi, 4 people in the household. Fingers crossed we don't run out of data, right? So I want to make sure, as we're talking about wired and wireless connectivity, if we really want to impact the homework gap, the priority has to be on wired connectivity, primarily in low-income areas. And to your point, the Affordable Connectivity Program can help close that gap. And we are fortunate in Maryland to have the additional subsidy. But I just want to make sure we highlight that if that is our goal, then the answer is wired connectivity in the home. And as we're working with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City to provide connectivity to 8 of their locations, what we are hearing also from our partners is they're not interested in having a conversation about outdoor wireless connectivity. The residents are not interested in outdoor wireless. What they are interested in is how can we not just have connectivity, but affordable and reliable connectivity. That's the issue.
Great. And there are many efforts across levels of government to address challenges to broadband equity and access. The Office of Statewide Broadband was established in 2021 with the goal of getting all Marylanders connected to high-speed, affordable broadband by 2026. Baltimore City established the Office of Broadband and Digital Equity to create transformational action when it comes to eliminating the digital divide. So while funding is being allocated and we're building out these networks, this question is 2 parts. What does local government still need, and how should and could the tech community lean in?
I think that's my question. So what local government needs, quite frankly, is partnerships. And let me be clear. Partnerships are not, let's have an event and you show up whenever there is a camera. That's not a partnership. Partnership is sitting at the table, talking with, building with, planning with the city and our partners, because we can't solve the problem. The issue of digital equity, digital inclusion, we need as many folks coming to the table with great ideas and resources. I will say that the office was seeded with $35 million in ARPA funds. Now, you all know, $35 million sounds huge, but in the grand scheme of things, I got about 2 years, and then we have to figure out how do we sustain our efforts. And for the most part, our investments have been or are going to be focused on our infrastructure development, and that's where we need partnerships. We need to be able to figure out what are some, for instance, how do you standardize digital literacy or digital education training? There are folks all over who says, we can train you to operate a computer, and 6 months later, the person does not know how to do that. There are folks who says, we have digital navigators, but digital navigators can be defined in 27 different ways. So let's talk about what we need, what the gaps are, and then work strategically to address them.
Can you mention something that I think is important, and that's making sure that we're using these federal funds in a way that can create long-term systemic change, right? And so everybody's talked about how there's this transformative amount of money that's come out. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But if we don't use that money well and wise, then we will have spent that money and we will not get it back. Congress will not have an appetite to spend it again, right? So we have to find ways to have market improvements in people's access to and their ability to participate from an education standpoint, from a telehealth standpoint, from a jobs perspective. We heard the other panel talking about all these wonderful job opportunities. If you don't have the skill set to be online and participate, none of those jobs are gonna be for you. Right? And so, our new governor has talked a lot about that, right? Improving our labor and our workforce in Maryland, that's not something that's, new or unique. That's something that we've been dealing with for a long time. Ask Kelly Schultz, right? It's something that this state has been trying to solve for a while. So we have to get people prepared, skilled, and ready to join tomorrow, right? And so we have this money now, and we need to use it really well and wise. And I think our Office of Statewide Broadband is doing a good job, right? And they're trying to find places from an infrastructure perspective to pull in rural communities to make sure they have the ability to get online. But that money can also be used to address the other issue, which is adoption, right? And that's what Kenya is talking about. And so I think we need to be smart. I think we need to be talking together and realizing that we have a common goal. And if we all win, then we're making not just wins for us right now today, but we're making wins for tomorrow and for where Maryland needs to go to be a participant. And we've got to attract talent from Virginia. I see you, Jack. We're coming for you, Jack, in Virginia. So we've got to attract talent from all over. This region is special, and we should be able to be a winner in this area because of our proximity to DC and just because it's Maryland, right? And so if we do this well and work together, I think we can make some significant strides that will impact decades to come.
I would reiterate about the sustainability and systematic changes because, for example, of the skills and any adoptions, it takes time. So, for example, of the Garrett County, when we visited, about 1/3 of addresses do not have access to the internet, and then they have 5 public libraries, and then the distance that having people, and then they don't have a reliable wireless either. So we can really give out the hotspot to train or help them engage in meaningful way of the digital learnings as well. So I think and then changing people's behaviors and then changing the communities who are really truly in digital divide. It takes time to build the trust. It takes time to build the systematic changes. So I think it is really a long-term investment. We have to look at it, but also not leaving those people who are living in the digital divide, and we can quickly move them to the connections in few years. So I think strategic investment for the few years is important, but really sustainability and the long-term plan for not leaving anyone out is very important.
If I can just add, I think it would be helpful if we all adopted a digital equity lens, if you will. So to your point, I had a partner say, we're going to survey as many Baltimore City residents as possible to figure out what they need in terms of connectivity and devices and education and training. Sounds great, let's do that. So we're gonna put together this survey online and have everybody, did you just say you put no? That's not a digital equity lens. So as you are innovating your programs, as you are staffing up your organizations, think about those folks that cannot access the internet. That's the one piece that I think, if we can do that, the other thing I'll tell you, as much as possible, what do you do with your old computers? How do you dispose of your unwanted, unused equipment? Well, what the city did at the beginning of COVID, we had so many computers holding up space in city government. We were able to donate over 900 computers and other equipment to a local organization, PCs for People, because they refurbish and then provide that equipment to low-income residents. But just think about the impact, right? If every company had a policy to dispose of equipment in a way that it could be reused, could be refurbished and reused by someone else, just imagine the impact. And that's something very, very small.
That's great. We talked a little bit about businesses and bring business to Maryland. It's no secret that today's businesses are increasingly relying on connectivity. And when we talk about that shift to 4G, that allowed us to transfer data quickly. Ashley, you were mentioning 5G, and if the panel could talk a little bit about the difference that 5G will make and the potential that it has to make for businesses and for citizens.
I think, again, that 5G is a great economic opportunity across many industries and at every skill level. And the wireless industry estimates that across the state of Maryland that the economic impact will be 62,000 new jobs and $21 billion in GDP over the next 10 years. That is transformational. It means a lot of jobs in our industry, but it also means a lot of jobs across industries. And I think, as people on this panel have spoken about, as the previous panel has spoken about, really that means that there's a great opportunity to prepare our workforce for those jobs, and that has to be a collaboration between industry, academia, and the public sector.
And I think, Tiffany, you mentioned this earlier, but when we talk about these jobs, we really need to start thinking about, what are they? How can we prepare college students, high school students, trades for what these jobs actually are? And I think one of the ones that comes to mind is in healthcare. We've seen over the past few years how much telemedicine has been such a huge part of our state and just really across the country and across the world. And so when we start to dig into, how we're going to make this work, how we're going to make these jobs work, we really need to start thinking about like what are those jobs and how can we prepare our students for them.
Thoughts from the panel on that? How can we prepare our future workforce?
Well, I mean, I think when you think about, so the Fiber Association estimates that there's going to be over 1 million miles in fiber that need to be laid in order to meet the 5G the 5G needs of just the top 25 U.S. cities in the U.S. Okay, so that means a ton of construction. It means a ton of engineers. It means a ton of fiber splicers, right? And so I think that all of that is really an opportunity for us to think through what those partnerships look like with career and technical high schoolers. Also, there's a lot of work that's already being done that I think we need to kind of like double down on, right? So the Wireless Infrastructure Association has done a phenomenal job of establishing apprenticeship programs in order to prepare people, again, at every level of the kind of skills spectrum for these jobs. And we think it's going to take us about 10 years to build out all of that infrastructure. We're at the very beginning of the opportunity. And so really, I think it's just about identifying those partnerships, establishing the right contacts, and then kind of embracing, I think, a train the trainer model, right? We need to make sure that that the folks who are responsible for training our workforce, teachers, educators, really that we're bringing them in and showing them the skills that we need in order to prepare the next generation for the jobs of the future.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'll just kind of echo what Ashley was talking about in the sense that there's the jobs that are necessary. I mean, it is literally every single skill set. So I think that's going in to make sure we're talking to partners all over the state, right? And because it's not just city, like the city's got folks who are ready to be technical partners and vocational partners. It's rural communities. It's bringing everybody together to understand that there are jobs that are immediately available, but then we also need to make sure that there's jobs available for tomorrow, because as we build these networks, they're gonna have to be maintained, right? So somebody's gonna have to do that job. We're gonna need people up poles, we're gonna need people pulling fiber, we're gonna need people digging conduits, we're gonna need all of that, because again, the goal is sustainable engagement over a long period of time for everybody in this online world, right? And so we need to make sure that we're building this network in such a way that it's ready for 5G, it's ready for 10G, it's ready for whatever's coming down the road, so that we can be participatory and our students can be ready to engage in that way. And I think also making sure, part of closing that equity gap is making sure everybody feels like there's a role for them in the story, right? And so telling this story that's not just, hey, we've got all this wonderful biotech that's available and you can go chase money or chase that dream, but also, if you don't want to go to college, there's a space for you, and you can still make great pay in Maryland, staying here, doing this, and being a part of solving for tomorrow. And the more relevant you make that, then if somebody's hanging and digging conduit, then for broadband, then of course they're going to make sure they have broadband in their house because they understand the importance and the value of it, right? And so telling the story in a way that is inclusive for everybody, I think is really important as we kind of prepare the next generation for what's to come.
So if I can add, we're clear on the direct jobs, right? We understand that as we're building out our infrastructure, we need to ensure that we have folks that can pull fiber. I'll tell you right now, I need a good project manager, right? So we're clear that we need those direct jobs. Indirect jobs are, I don't want to overlook that. And so, for instance, I took my daughter to get her eyes examined, and the woman who I did not know the entire process is now done through telehealth. Like the optometrist is on the screen, blowing my mind. And I'm in digital equity, but it's blowing my mind. And what the woman, the older woman who was retired twice, her whole job was to just put the apparatus in front of my daughter's face. That's all she had to do. But it made her feel like she was still contributing. She was an older woman. She had all this experience in the health industry, but zero experience in tech. And she was also a little intimidated by tech. But she was able to get a job in telehealth that allowed her to use her people skills, allowed her to use some of her medical background, and her entire job was just to put the goggles in front of baby girl's face. So as we're thinking about those direct jobs, please also think about the indirect and those induced occupations that we know will be created as a result of this new world that I think we're in, this post-COVID. Are we post-COVID yet? We're not post yet. Okay, but we're all on the same page.
So Maryland has yet to introduce a small cell bill. There's over 30 states that have implemented policy that will advance next generation connectivity. What are some policy changes that need to be made at a state level to encourage necessary investment and ensure that we stay competitive as a state?
I'll answer from a non-small cell perspective, okay? But permitting is something that we need to look at because it slows the process, right? And it's just a hand clap right there. It slows our process. So as, you know, when you hear these big news stories about, oh, you're gonna get $100 million, or the federal government released $45 billion, what people have to understand is then it has to go through the process of actually getting you to a point where you can flick a switch and somebody is connected, right? So sometimes that process can be 18 months, it can be 2 years, and that's not even if you're talking about the fact that we don't have all of the skilled workers that we need to do the work, right? I'm just talking about from the time that you know that there's an allocation, from the time that our companies like a Comcast steps in and says, all right, we're coming to do this work. We've got to walk it out, we've got to build it. There's a whole lot of process. But part of the delay is permitting, right? And you know, we've got 24 jurisdictions and they all want it done differently. And I get it, and because the needs are different for the different local jurisdictions, but it creates delay because it then has to go through the government process. So if we could find a way to address that, because the faster we can get those permits and the faster we can work together, because it's not just us, we have to work with the utility companies, then we have to work with folks who actually have the nodes or have the poles, or there's a lot of processes behind the scenes that delays people, and folks need to be connected now to be participatory. And so if we can think about from a policy perspective, all of those little hurdles that are behind the scenes that delay us from getting people connected and address those in a smart way, I think that would be something that would be tremendously helpful to getting these stories down the road and getting people to actual connectivity, because when they see the headline, they're expecting they're going to have broadband tomorrow, and that is not how it goes. Absolutely. So then you've got people who are disappointed and who are frustrated, and they're reaching out to their lawmakers, and they're arguing, yelling, fussing at us because they don't understand the backstory and all the things that have to be done. So if we could find a way to address that, I think that would be really helpful to us.
And I think I'll add that it's not like, yes, streamlining the process is a big part of it, but it's also, I think, staffing appropriately. And there are workforce opportunities there, and I think we can work together to kind of figure out how to make sure we train folks so that they can step into those permitting roles and really add predictability to the process, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to tell our customers, whether it's AT&T or Verizon or whoever, when their networks are going to come online. I think another piece of it is, like, again, this is a huge infrastructure lift, right? And so we have to think about what are the policies in place in order to build the infrastructure faster. One of those things is micro-trenching and other kind of construction innovation. We have to just think differently about the way that we build these networks if we want to do them expeditiously, and we can do them in ways that are less invasive.
Keeping on that theme, I know some of you have worked with other states in building out some of these networks. And do you have any examples of best practices from other states that could serve as a model for Maryland moving forward?
I think Maryland is doing a great job, and there are, of course, examples of that would be considered like best practices that could be incorporated from across the state. But I'll point out one example in New York in particular. I think it kind of is illustrative of what can be achieved when we approach the build out of these networks as a collaboration between the public and the private sector. And so one of the challenges that many people on this panel face when they're looking to build infrastructure is that there is a lot of community opposition sometimes because of the aesthetics of our equipment. But I think that we can all agree that there are benefits to having the infrastructure there. And so how do we kind of work together to design a solution that meets the aesthetic requirements of a community and also meets the capacity and the coverage needs of that community? And so in New York, we worked with the city to really design a installation, a pole that could house multiple carriers and met the aesthetic requirements of the very kind of varied neighborhoods in the city, and then work together to push that through the approval process so that we could arrive at a solution that met everyone's needs. I think if we could take that approach more broadly, I think you are taking that approach in Baltimore about like how do we do this in collaboration in order to address a community's concerns, that we could see these networks come online faster to meet the needs that I think are kind of writ large.
Laura, I know you mentioned state, but I think if you look at Maryland and all of the jurisdictions, we have very different jurisdictions, very different needs within each of them. And so I think what you can do in terms of best practices too is look at how we've worked with each of the locals and start to share some of those across the state. For AT&T, FirstNet is actually a great example of that because, we've taken this thing that was directed by the federal government and deployed to states, and now we're working specifically with communities and local jurisdictions to ensure that they all get the public safety coverage that they need. And what's appropriate for someone on the Eastern Shore may not be appropriate for Baltimore City, but there are definitely different, there are pieces of that can transfer across the state and to other states across the country.
Yeah, I would agree about the local, each community has a unique needs and a different situation. That is a situation in Maryland. It's very different from Western to Eastern Shore. So I think engaging the communities early on is very important, and then giving them the opportunities to weigh in is very important. Also bringing some other partnerships, not just only the private or the other industries and the private and nonprofit partnerships early on is very important for any of the work we have done. All of the work we have done from agriculture, environment, health, and all other issues. So I think that is very important for the successful implementation.
If I can add, we talk about digital education, right? We talk, and I mentioned if companies could adopt a digital equity lens, right? So as you're thinking about your community engagement, right, you can easily have a conversation with the municipality, and they'll pull the community into the room, and you all sit around and you plan. What happens is when you install equipment in a neighborhood and they don't know what it is, it becomes this, and all people here, my favorite example is ShotSpotter. When the equipment was installed, residents are calling and there's something in my neighborhood listening to me talk. Because all they knew is that it was gunshot detection. They didn't understand how the technology worked. And so what happens is you show up in the community association meeting and you're 9 times out of 10 talking over everybody's head. They don't understand what it is you want them to understand. My challenge for all of you, well, not University of Maryland, you're pretty good at this, but my challenge for all of you is to change your approach to community engagement. Instead of saying, here's what we're going to do, take just a little more time to educate the community on the technology and how it's being used. This way, if you have informed community engagement, you have power, you have influence, you have progress. So again, if you apply just a little bit of digital equity, just a little bit, you can have, the results will be remarkable.
That's great. Thank you so much. A lot of great insights shared today. We're getting close to our time, and I want to leave a few minutes to open it up to the audience for questions for the panel. So now is that time. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and we'll bring you the mic. I know there are also a lot of people online, so please send an email with your question, and we'll try to address it.
Thank you guys for your contributions and frankly, the passion that you all are displaying. I'm wondering if you could speak to the impact that the supply chain crisis is having, because I deal with fiber providers at times, and one of their big concerns about building out has been related to the availability of actually getting fiber. So can you speak to that around the timing? Because we talked about they released the funding, people expect it tomorrow. What is that supply chain challenge doing to the ability to timely build out these networks?
In Baltimore City, as we are planning to pull fiber to all of our public housing locations, well, 8 of our public housing locations, we are looking at 300 plus days to get all the, not just the fiber, but all of the equipment that we need. So for us, the supply chain has been a major hindrance. Now, if you consider, again, to your point, we are a government entity. We got our funding in 2021. I am still waiting, literally still waiting for equipment that we ordered about a year ago. And there is a timestamp on ARPA funding. So I have to have it all obligated by the end of 2024. So for us, now it's a race against time. So it's a huge challenge for us.
I think that's a fair way to kind of talk about it. Is it's the race against the clock, right? Because there's this money on the table, and we want to make sure we spend it well, and we want to make sure it gets obligated, and governments have what they need. So as a partner, I mean, so we're Comcast, right? And so we were already in line for some orders for fiber, and so now trying to get all of the additional fiber for all the projects that we're now trying to do to bring infrastructure, to build out infrastructure, is a challenge and a problem. And we, again, not just because there's a time clock on the federal money that's coming in, but there is an expectation for people. And when folks are not, when their address is not serviceable, they call me and they email me, and it's unpleasant, right? Because I don't want to tell somebody, hey, we can't get you online for 2 years. Nobody wants to hear that, right? And so it just creates a bigger issue, but you understand the strain, right? Like nobody was anticipating, COVID, and what that did, it slowed us all down. And so as we're moving through COVID, right, it's still a challenge. And so I think just trying to level set expectations while also understanding that we're asking, ultimately the ask is for people to wait. And if you've been waiting, if you ever had to wait and somebody tells you to wait longer while they have gig speed in their house, it's a challenging conversation, and it's a reaction that I totally get and I totally understand. And so I think we just have to find a better way to prioritize and make sure that where we need fiber pulled in unserved communities, that we're doing that as fast as we can. But then where service ability is not the issue, we're making sure we're addressing adoption in the process so that people feel like there is a response to what's happening, and they're not feeling like they're just being told to wait longer and longer. So I think addressing issues that we have the ability to address now, we should be doing that, and we should be working with governments to do that in smart ways.
Ms. Kenya, Ed Roberts from CCBC Community College of Baltimore County. Good. I will. The whole concept of digital lens equity, as you know at CCBC, we've got thousands of students, and our president, Dr. Kurt Knightis, will always say, a student is a student is a student. So what does that, I'm still not sure what that digital equity lens looks like, and some of the concepts that you're looking for, and yes, I will call you.
So I think it's, in some respects, it's subtle. An example that I mentioned earlier was ensuring that you all have a computer donation policy, right? Imagine the impact we'd have there. It means as we are developing ways to interact with the community, we are not putting everything online, which we know is a challenge. It also means, for instance, we're doing some work with seniors. I'm actually launching a pilot program to use VR technology to teach seniors how to use the computer. Now, if you can imagine a 70-year-old with VR goggles who is having the opportunity to, we're using, I think, Google Earth to take a trip through the Serengeti. It's amazing to see that technology, but they're just not trusting. And so for us, that digital equity lens, if you will, it means that there are some baby steps you gotta go through to get to the goggles. It means you are having actual conversations with the target audience. Because what we tend to do is we plan. I saw the VR technology and thought it was the coolest thing in the world and couldn't wait to get my hands on it, right? Ready to charge forward, but a series of conversations had to happen with the target population before we could do that. That digital equity lens forces you to just think twice about how you are impacting the folks that are not already connected. I will tell you this, and a lot of the planning that we're doing, our foundational population, if you will, are seniors and the disabled. If I can create programming that responds or provides services to seniors and the disabled, everybody else is going to be pretty good, if you think about it. Because seniors and the disabled have the highest challenges, and University of Maryland can correct me if I'm wrong, they have the most challenges with getting not just access, but then adoption. So if, for us, our digital equity lens means identify the target population, and if you can provide service to that population, you're cooking with grease.
Yes, we did not sit strategically for some reasons, but thank you for the questions about the digital equity. I think involving the consumers and the people we are trying to reach from the beginning, and then their voices are heard and included. And a lot of those equity and divide, it is not by choice, and also a lot of trust. It is historical, trust that people we have to build. So, for example, of the teaching password resetting, and that's the most common questions people receive in digital navigators and at the public library. And then why they have to trust the two-factor authentication, and why they cannot give that information to others. So I think for just the one there is no one quick answers. And then for those people who are not heard and unserved or underserved, and there are reasons for that. So I think for looking at behind it and engaging from the beginning is very important. And also we talk about a lot of the educations and barriers. More than half of this population in the United States, they do not go to college. And for the apprenticeships and other things, that each industry meetings I went to or the conferences, everyone talks about the workforce issues. And then what are the gaps here from the K through 12, or even some of the people who are not in the workforce and not in the college, not in the four-year college, not in the community colleges, and where are the gaps and where are the connections. So I think that more deeply getting into things, even though it takes time, but it is the efforts to understand where each one stands, not just currently, years ago and generations ago, where we are. I think that is very, very important for us, what we do.
If I can just one point that you made, partnering with the community is an art and a science, right? And so trust is huge. I'm city government. They are prepared for some shenanigans from government. This is our reality. The same is true for Comcast, same is true for AT&T. So you need to align yourself with a trusted community partner. Take the time to figure out who that is in your community. So for us, for instance, it's the Digital Harbor Foundation is a great trusted community partner, right? So once you identify the appropriate partner to, if you will, liaise between you on your behalf with you and the community, then the AT&Ts and the Comcast, then Comcast can come in. But I think that's a really good point. As you mentioned, if you can build trust in the community, start with a trusted community partner.
I think part of the trust that has to be rebuilt when we talk about digital equity, right, is understanding why people feel like they were, I'm gonna use the word marginalized. Sorry, that might not be an unpopular phrase, but we need to address that, right? Yeah. Whether you live in an urban community, whether you live in a rural community. I mean, you feel like it was a story that was told without you, right? The present day story is one that was told without you. And so I think we have to recognize that. And when we show up, we need to show up prepared to own that and make people really feel like we care, right? And, you know, from a corporate responsibility perspective, right? Showing up in a real way, yep. Right? Figuring out who the touch points in the communities need to be, and not showing up saying, hey, we're coming with Comcast, and so, yay, we're gonna drop this box in your lawn, and now you should be excited to have service. No, it really is coming with a respectful approach, saying, this is your community, tell me how I can meet your needs. Let me understand why broadband and the relevance of it hasn't been something that you've embraced yet from an adoption perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And so coming to it from that perspective, finding out the voices in the community, where they're religious partners, where they're community groups, whether they're, you know, Boys and Girls Club, whoever has been doing the work in that community for a long time and has earned the trust of that community, working with them and understanding that it is our job to build that trust, ensuring that people feel like they're a part of the long-term story. So again, going back to the point about creating a permanent subsidy in place so people know that they're gonna be a part of the long-term conversation, right? Doing those things will help rebuild trust and making sure that we're being real about it as we're going, right? Showing up with devices, making sure people, yes, real and authentic, right? And I think that matters, and so that's something that's important to us. I know Comcast, we have lift zones, we have Rise, we have a bunch of programming that we're doing, and we're not just taking so the federal government has digital navigators that's planned for in some of the money that's been released, right? So that gives communities the ability to hire folks that come into communities, and they can figure out how to talk to seniors or talk to whoever about that. But also from a corporate perspective, corporate responsibility perspective, saying that we are going to commit our corporate dollars to solving this issue, right? And showing up, making sure we bring devices so students can get online, so seniors can get online, and committing our dollars and our resources and part of our profits to that story, I think shows up and says that we understand that we have to rebuild trust, and the way that corporations do that is where they invest their money, right?
All right, thank you so much. You know, a lot of talk today about the potential, but still a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of need for collaboration, you know, between community, between government, between industry, and stakeholders, and a lot of work to do to really do this the right way, and build out these networks and ensure that we're closing that gap.
And I'll just take a moment. Take a minute and acknowledge the passion of the panelists here, but in particular, I hope that you will join me in embarrassing and recognizing the passion of Tiffany, whose birthday it is today. So everyone wish her a happy birthday.
And we won't sing, or we will if you want. So happy birthday, and thank you for coming on your birthday as well. And thanks again for the Maryland Tech Council for bringing light to this really important issue. And now there's a 15-minute break, and then we'll return here.